All right, welcome to this online lecture for population ecology. Let's get this started. All right, if you notice at the top of each of my slides, I've got some green words up here with Roman numerals. Those are the topics that you're going to be taking notes on in this lecture. First one is population size. So we're going to talk about population size first. Let's talk about dispersal of populations. There are three different types. You can see pictures on this right-hand side. The first one is just randomly assorted, so there's no rhyme or reason why this maple tree over here is located here, or that pine tree is over here. It's just whoever grew there first, grew there first. It kind of looks like this too. Down this third one is clumped, and this is how most organisms live. Um, Here's some information for you to write down. And it's pretty much for protection from predators. It would be good to care for their young if they are living together, like family units, stuff like that. This middle distribution, called uniform distribution, you really don't see this that often in nature. There's usually going to be some reason why they're equally spread out and living like that. But so for the most part, you're going to see random, but then for the most part, you're going to see clumped distribution the most. And just remember, during this lecture, if you need to stop, pause, rewind, any of that, that's up to you. So if it seems like I'm going pretty fast, you can pause. All right, so some things that influence the population sizes. First, you got to know what I'm talking about when I say population density. That just means how many individuals are living in a given area at a certain time. So there's one type of population influence, and it's called density independent population control. And that is stuff that happens to the population, and it's going to wreak havoc no matter how dense the population is. So some examples like a flood or hurricane or a forest fire, that is going to cause some damage no matter if there's a couple squirrels living in this forest or it's packed with squirrels. The opposite of that obviously would be density dependent. So that is dependent on how dense these species are living in proximity to each other. So, for example, down here, infectious disease, if these organisms are living really densely populated, packed together, and some kind of infectious disease breaks out, it's going to wipe through that population as opposed to if they were more spread out. If that infectious disease broke out, it wouldn't spread as quickly as it would if it was really densely populated. Think like zombie apocalypse. Where is the most damage going to happen? Probably in the major cities where all of the humans are densely packed together, as opposed to out in the countryside that infectious disease doesn't spread as quickly. I know that's not a real life example, but The Walking Dead is pretty cool. So, right, so what determines the population growth? Four things: births, how many organisms are being birthed, how many organisms are dying, immigration, so how many are just moving into the location, and emigration is the opposite of immigration, how many organisms are moving out. And I've got a nice little equation here for you. It's not super complicated if you look at what it's actually saying. The population change in an environment, in an ecosystem, if you take the births and add all of the influx of population, the things moving into the ecosystem and the things being born into the ecosystem, and you subtract how many things are dying out of the ecosystem and how many are moving out of the ecosystem, that is your population change. So that's pretty straightforward. Couple things before I move on. You need to understand that biotic potential is just the ability of a population to actually grow. So a population that is going to be really, really large has a larger biotic potential than a population that's going to be really, really small. That being said, every population has an intrinsic growth rate. So it's kind of like a hypothetical number. If there were unlimited resources and no limitations whatsoever, how high, how large could that population really get? So knowing these two terms, things that actually limit a population growth. So there's always going to be shortages. You've got your light. If you're in a forest, at the bottom of the forest, you're not going to see a lot of light. Shortage of water, space, food, nutrients, predators, all of those good things. all of the factors that limit population growth are called an environmental resistance. So all of these things, these are factors that could limit a population from growing. That is part of an environmental resistance. So if you take the biotic potential, the potential for a population to actually grow, and you take into account all of the environmental resistances of that population, you are left with something that we call carrying capacity. So this is the capacity of an ecosystem basically to hold a certain given population. If you've taken biology before, you've probably seen carrying capacity in some form, and you'll see some graphs in a little bit that show that. So a good definition for carrying capacity would be the number of individuals of a given species that can be sustained in a particular space. All right. So this is ripped straight out of your amazing textbook. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because you can pause it and you can write stuff down from this if you want. But this is like a little population size meter. If it's going this way, it's getting bigger. If it's going this way, it's getting smaller. And here's some things, both abiotic, remember that's not living, never was living, like light or temperature, not alive, and biotic things that influence the population going up or down. So this is a nice graphic to maybe jot some notes down onto your Cornell notes. Okay, still talking about population growth. We are in Roman numeral number 2, population growth. How do they grow? You have definitely seen this graph before. This is an exponential growth curve, and some populations grow like this. So it starts off slowly, not a lot of growth, not a lot of growth, not a lot of growth, and wham, grows crazy. Usually this is when resources are not limited. More realistically, you're going to see a logistic growth. So it is a little bit of exponential growth, but then those resources start playing a role, that environmental resistance. So not a lot of growth, not a lot of growth. Wham, we're really growing. And now, oh no, we're running out of food, we're running out of space, we're running out of something, and the population starts to slow down. It's still increasing, but it's slowing down. And there's that carrying capacity. So typically a population really won't go much further over this carrying capacity. If it does go over the carrying capacity, it's going to look something like this. So here's the population, goes over the carrying capacity. So there are too many species of a population for that ecosystem to actually support. So the population is going to start to go down, and it's going to go down. And if it dips back under that carrying capacity, that just means that there are surplus resources. So that population can now start to increase again. There's enough resources to go around. So it'll start to increase. And you see what that pattern is doing. It's going up. And then, oh no, you overshot the population size. So it's going to go back down. And it's under the carrying capacity. So it's going to go back up. Oh no, you went over. So it overshot again. And it's going to keep going and going and going. Eventually it'll level out from that first overshoot. But what happens if a population really exceeds the carrying capacity? I'm not talking a little bit of an overshoot. I'm talking way too many organisms of that population. Something horrible is going to happen. If a population uses up all of the resources, I'm talking there's nothing left to support a population, they can temporarily exceed it, but if they do not switch to a new resource, so let's find a new resource because it's all used up. Or, you know what, another option would be to move to a new area with other resources. If neither of those two things happen, the population will crash. And this is what a population crash will look like. Here's a population going up, 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 up. These reindeer used up all of their resources and crash. Maybe the carrying capacity was somewhere over here, and these reindeer didn't stop when they should have stopped, and population crashed. And if you notice, this might look a little familiar. St. Paul Island, if this is starting to ring a bell, this was our last class's warm-up, that you read a little article about the St. Paul Island reindeer and how the population crashed. You wrote a hypothesis about why you think that it crashed. Well, here's your reason. So still population growth. Something that I kind of mentioned in class earlier, predation, predator prey. It helps control population size. So in this specific example, you got your little wolf, you got a little moose, and the wolf eats the moose, so predator prey. And you can kind of see these population curves affecting each other. So If this right here, the wolf population starts to go down, that means there are less predators. That means that the mooses can start to increase again. So this is the purple line of the moose going up, up, up because the predators are going down and down. And then there are more moose here, so that means that can support more wolves. So the wolf population started going up. And as you can see, the moose population started to go down. In this specific case, though, the wolves are struck by a virus, and that made their population plummet. And because of that, look what happened to the moose population. It skyrocketed. So it was influenced. So the moose population was influenced by just a virus that hit the wolf. So that's pretty interesting. All right, we are on to Roman numeral number 3, reproductive patterns. So this is how species reproduce. You've probably seen both of these words in biology. Asexually means that the offspring or the babies are exact genetic copies. Best example that I have to give you is bacteria. They just split apart and they're exactly the same as their parent bacteria. The other type is sexually, obviously. You take two gametes and form a offspring from two parents. So like this would be your sperm and your egg. But it does have 3 disadvantages. So here's 3 disadvantages. You do need to have to reproduce more to keep up with the asexually, because bacteria, they're reproduce. They are reproducing like crazy, where sexual production does take a while to happen. 9 months for a human, for example. Also, because you're combining 2 different gametes instead of just splitting apart from your parent, there's increased chance of genetic errors. And guess what? If you are reproducing sexually, you've got to find a mate. And sometimes there's mating rituals, like you gotta take that person out to the movies. You gotta spend some money on them. You know what I'm talking about, and that takes time and energy. And that's actually a disadvantage because all of these bacteria, they're getting it on without having to take their bacteria to movies. So think about that. There is a reason why 97% of all the species on the earth reproduce sexually. And if you haven't guessed it by now, it is because of genetic diversity. These little genetic errors that happen cause natural selection, cause things to be more adapted. So we learned about that when we read about natural selection a little while ago. All right, there are a couple patterns of reproduction in species. I'm going to let you write this down, but there's called R selected and K selected. Pause this to write this stuff down. I'm going to show you some graphs on the next slide. This would be an example of an R species, and this would be an example of a K species. Your K species has a high rate of population increase. They reproduce early and have many offspring. So these would be like your little things that reproduce really, really fast. K selected are things that reproduce later in life, like your large mammals, things like that. So here is your, your R species is your little cockroach, for example, and your K species is like your big rhinoceros. So if you think about it, R species is like your J curve, your exponential curve, and K species would be more of along the lines of a slower growth. Here's another picture that I ripped right out of your textbook. Lots of information about R selected species, lots of information about K selected species. Take a minute. You can pause this, write this down. There are 2 words down at the bottom, opportunist versus competitor. Opportunist just means that this little cockroach or this dandelion can get in there, reproduce a lot really fast. Some of them might survive better in crazy different environments, whatever they might have jumped into, and really take advantage and take opportunity of an opening in a niche or an opening in an ecosystem. By competitor, I mean these guys, they're sticking around for the long haul. So they're built to compete with others for those resources that are staying there. These guys, cockroach, if the resources go out, they can just jump to another place and start reproducing like crazy. I'm going to show you one last thing. Survivorship curves. They show the percent of a population at different ages. There's 3 types. I'm going to show you a quick diagram on the next page. You can pause this and jot it down. Type 1 is late loss. Type 2 and type 3, which is early loss. So your type 1, these guys are living really, really long. So check this out. This is